G'day, this is a most unusual video for me. Normally I just draw directly freehand in ink. In this video I'm going to be using a pencil, a ruler and an eraser. What I want to do is just really have some fun and draw an extreme perspective angle structure. And I thought some sort of tower, and we'd maybe play around with it and just try and look as 3D as possible. But because of the extreme angle and the long lines, I will use a ruler, I will use a pencil, and I will do more of an underdrawing than I would normally do. So this square column here represents the top section of our tower. And I want to put a spire on top. And I want the top of the spire to be here on eye level, or the horizon if you must. Our third vanishing point for this 3-point perspective is down here. I'll do the spire first and then we'll move down the tower. And let me just apologize up front a bit for this video. The problem I had was that I had to raise my camera much higher to take in a much wider, higher sheet of paper. Now that meant there was actually room for me to get my head under the camera, which is normally impossible. And because I was working on the far side of a sheet of paper as well, I leant forward over the paper far more than I need to or am able to normally. So I had to take a lot of video out because the top of my head was basically blocking the view. So therefore, a lot of this looks a bit more like stop motion rather than sped up. But I think you can see what's happening. I'm creating this from my imagination. It's not based on a real structure. Yep, my head was covering those 3 little decorative elements, or I suppose they're vents at the base of the spire. But you can see what's happening. I'm very dependent on my vanishing points and on my third vanishing point down below. Now, of course, if we were on the ground looking up at a tower going up into the sky, then that third vanishing point would be at the top of the page, not at the base. And I thought it was interesting to have eye level coincide with the very top of the spire, where that round ball is, so that the cross piece on the cross actually now starts to slope down the other way to the vanishing point. I'm using a 2B pencil here, and I'm using a mechanical pencil because, well, they don't get blunter. So when you just want a line and you don't want it to be changing thickness, it's a great choice. Look, I have to say, I got quite lost with a lot of the detail that I was doing. I'm certainly not used to having to work out from my imagination either the architecture or the perspective. The thing I found challenging was, despite all I know about perspective and despite all I've said about perspective, despite my understanding of angles and such, because this was extreme perspective, it was still hard to angle these lines, the, in effect, perspective affected vertical lines of this drawing at a steep enough angle. The lower down I went, even though I knew it was going to become ridiculously distorted, it's still hard to actually do it. And I think this is why doing something with a rigid framework, as in explicit framework drawn onto the paper, is helpful, because it forces us to admit that our natural default is still to probably not do the angles as extreme as we need to. Well, that's certainly the case for me anyway. But it is fun because it doesn't really matter. And in the end, how it looks is how it looks. We don't have to match it with a historic structure anywhere. And I'm not intending to do everything necessarily in a pencil outline. Although I think at this stage I forgot that I wasn't actually drawing in pencil. It's a great exercise to do for a lot of reasons. There are a lot of benefits. It's probably worth working out roughly some sort of architectural structure and what perspective angle you want to draw it at before you start, and just do a simplified, if you like, version, real actual size, to make sure that it will fit on the paper, and it will give you angles that are interestingly steep enough for what you have in your mind. Creating three-dimensionality is really important in this. Having little step backs and edges that come over, seeing the thickness of the wall at the sides of the windows, these things are all important. We progress down in our third stage, if you like, where we're going to expand the base a little bit to reflect a fairly common architectural structure in building spires and steeples such as this. When I was first planning exactly what I was going to draw on top of the tower, instead of this triangular spire, I actually had a round drum that had columns around the side, and then I had a large dome on top of the drum, and then I had a tall lantern on top of the dome, also supported by some columns. At some point, fortunately, I realized that this was simply going to be ridiculously difficult to draw on this scale with the detail that I had in mind. But speaking of detail, as we go down, there is a lot less detail to be seen, and what we do see is so distorted that it's pretty much unrecognizable as what it is. What we have to do, the most important thing, is that any vertical lines are at the right perspective angle. And we also need to allow for foreshortening. I haven't mentioned that yet, but foreshortening is extremely important. One of the things I did on a bit of paper before I started was I basically drew that original square column, and then by using diagonals, I did it for the entire length of the structure. And then I used the diagonals to find out where the halfway point was. And of course, it was about 3/4 of the way down the column. And so I did the same for the top half, and then the bottom half, divided those in two as well. And it just reminded me of how severe the foreshortening is on this. That the visual compression as we go down the column picks up momentum the further down we go. It becomes more and more compressed, which leaves very little room for anything except suggesting the perspective angles. But of course, what you do or don't have room for does also depend on what angle you're drawing from and where your eye level is. We could have chosen an eye level in the center of the tower, and so it went upwards to a vanishing point one way and went downwards to a vanishing point the other. And that way we could have created a bit of a fisheye look, 4-point perspective scene. So at this point, I'm still trying to just ensure that I've got these angles correct. I became aware that a lot of the columns I did, even though they were just the barest suggestion, really weren't at the right angle. Again, even though I'd measured using the ruler and the pencil a number of guidelines along the width, along the side of each of the tower to guide me, it was still hard to actually make the lines as extreme as they are. But remember, we're trying to create a three-dimension effect, so we have to put every bit of depth in that we can discover or that we can fit in. And particularly where the base of one section hits the cornice or the stand, the mount, whatever it sits on, where we're looking down and we can see the silhouette edge of all the decorative elements for each level. We want to try and not draw the detail of that because we can't possibly do that, but we want to suggest with our lines and our proportions and our angles something of the effect of this. I am still drawing all the lines, the final lines, freehand with the pen. You might notice I don't use the ruler with my ink. I still like the look and the feel of a freehand ink line, but for something such as this, a ruler drawn pencil guideline is probably, well, if it's not essential, it's a tremendous help at least. Of course, there are no rules how we draw. In the end, it's what you enjoy and what takes your drawing, your end result drawing, in the direction you want. Not just this drawing, but all of the drawing that we do. I want to get better and better at freehand ink drawing, and so I push myself with that all the time. But sometimes it's fun to do something different, and I certainly found that with this. It was a little hard to know where to stop. Let's erase all the pencil and see how it looks. So I add a few lines and then do something else I've never done before. And just to accentuate the extreme angle, we highlight the part where we can see the detail and the angles and the impact of this perspective viewpoint most clearly. From my point of view, it was quite a bit of fun. I didn't work out all of the perspective exactly. I've got a few bits where I fudged things because I wasn't 100% certain, but as in most things when we draw, we're going for the overall effect rather than exactness. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, it was a bit of fun for me. Why not have an extreme perspective fun challenge yourself and create something and seek to put it into an extreme perspective? We certainly learn a lot about perspective, and it's great to learn it when we're not halfway through a masterpiece. But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, whatever you're learning through it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.